Hello and welcome to Chess Book Reviews 154. 154. I've got three books to show you, none of them new, but all of them contain points of interest, I like to think. The first was published by Chess Digest, a company which doesn't exist anymore. And Ken Smith was the managing director. He put them together. I don't think any book published in this country that I've ever seen would have somebody's FIDE title against it and then with a rating against it. But Ken Smith was the boss and he liked that. And it says Larry Evans, International Grandmaster. Larry Evans is somebody that's interested, a number of you I know. This book was published in the United States in 1988, so it is quite a long time ago. I like it because it gives fairly digestible, shall we say, fairly digestible chunks of information about solid lines, but no, not particularly popular. But the first thing, I haven't prepared this, that they talk about is the Hungarian defense, which is in the Italian game, early bishop e7. They've got it at move 4, but you can probably play it at move 3, can't you, after knight c6, bishop c4, and then you can play bishop e7. Now, you might say, well, it's not very popular, but I don't mean to say it isn't solid and interesting. Lots of game references, which is what you want, isn't it? So up to page 14, it's all about the Hungarian defense. And here it is, a defense which has always interested me, the Philidor. Bent Larsen wrote the book, Why Not the Philidor Defense? Well, Bent Larsen, maybe if you had this book, you'd know the answer. And if you were there at Bad Lauterberg when Keane drew with Karpov using the Philidor defense, you'd have a better answer than I do. Philidor defense is one of the oldest of Black's defenses against 1e4, dating back to the 16th century analysis by André Philidor in L'Analysis. Okay, I can't speak French. In modern times, the Soviet GMs and Tushin, Kolmov, Lutikov have essayed it. For a while, the great Danish GM Larsen experimented with 3 e takes d, e takes d4, and then g6, a sort of King's Indian. Nonetheless, most modern GMs regard the Philidor as a little too cramping. Well, they're right, and it is. Lacking sufficient resource. Well, you have to get your skates on. If you look in the British Chess magazine about 10 years ago, this isn't a plug because I was editing it at that time. Although I was editing at that time, you'll see Pete Tamburo talking about the Philidor defense, and you'll get some interesting suggestions and some enjoyable games to play through, which probably is worth as much as anything to an armchair analyst such as myself. He mentions Jonathan Messel's coverage of this, which John played this in the World Junior Championship. So after d6, you play an early f5. There's quite a bit about the Philidor here. Let me show you the format. Single columns, and with the name of the two players contesting the game in bold strike, Black. So it stands out quite well on the page. You could perhaps wish for a few more diagrams. And I've got very poor eyesight these days, but I can follow this quite accurately. And my assumption, it shows the game one of Ray's games, which he played this against Unzicker. Unzicker Keen from Moscow 77. Yes. And it mentions the Antashian system, which is after you take on d4, you play knight f6 and then bishop e7, I think. Just to make me out to be a liar, perhaps. No, I was right. Bishop e7, 5, bishop e7. Karl Gorka mentioned this to me, so that's how I know. So thanks to him. And there's various references to Antashian's games. One or two older ones. I see one by Schlechter. Now here we have where you form a strong point on e5 with knight d7. See that? Yes, you can. There we are. It's good fun. I like it. This is the move order recommended by Tim Harding in his book, which I also recommend. Being generous tonight. Which instead of playing knight d7, you play knight f6 first. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that might lead you into paths analogous with or even identical to the Petrov's defense. If it does, well, don't worry about it. And if it doesn't, don't worry about it. But it's interesting to see these transpositions in these positions, and I can assure you that just because the first few moves are obvious to anybody, even somebody like me, subsequently the play can be subtle, interesting, and involve shifts in fortune, which can often, well, how shall we say, can often lead to interesting games. Here we have something which is a complete world away, in which I've dabbled, the Latvian Gambit. You may also know this as the Lettish. It's an excellent practical. I remember playing this at a game in Plymouth and getting a draw, and I remember also Carl Foreman playing it against me at a tournament in Leamington Spa, and I beat him, and he was no one's fool, and he won the section and a lot of money. He won 5 games off the reel after that. And he said in the post-mortem, "You understand the Latvian Gambit, don't you?" And I followed a line recommended by Nimzovich in my system, which is to play the knight from e5 to c4, and then in time back to e3 again. And then you sort of mold your position around it and play bishop e2, and you get a comfortable game. And if black starts throwing all sorts of crap at you across the board, well, you're ready and you're waiting, aren't you? Oh, well, I hope Andrew Smith is looking at this. Here we have an early queen f6, which is a pretty good move. They were still leading with the Latvian, talking about the Latvian. And there's the knight on c4, if you look at the diagram, at the top and on the right. So there's plenty of diagrams, which I think is was a plus point. This is called the Queen Pawn Counter Gambit. I think you'll find it's got other names, don't you? There we are. Don't tell Jonathan Rogers. Mentions Counter Gambits by Harding, a really brilliant book. This is a good book, but it's not as good as the Counter Gambits by Harding. And they call it the Elephant Gambit. I couldn't think of the name of it fast enough. I've never played it in a proper game, not even in Blitz. But if you do get it played against you, don't worry. Straightforward moves will give you, well, I hope, an even game. The Petrov defense is dealt with here, and he recommends 3 knight c3. Not a very ambitious move, is it? But somebody once said if Keres plays a move, then all of a sudden no one can see anything wrong with it. As if to say, the most obvious move. Oh, I didn't think of that. Well, look through this book and it'll give you all sorts of thoughts. But the most important thing is to see if you're comfortable with it. If that's the sort of game you like, play it and enjoy it. But it may not be. Here's a very unusual move. Queen e7. That move 3. I'm going to show you this in the Petrovs. Look at that. I've never seen that before. To be sure, this is a rarely seen defense. Well, rarely seen or not, it could be something new. This is part 2, which is written by Larry Evans, the Grandmaster. The late Larry Evans now. Ken Smith has also passed away, in fact. 3 knights defense. Not something which occupies a lot of space in chess literature. Chess has a tendency to move backwards in its creative evolution. So we expect a resurgence in this move when the great passion for the Lopez begins to wane. You'd be lucky. A thing to remember, if White's task is to seek the initiative, then it is doubly hard for Black to do so, since he lags a move behind. And he quotes himself in MCO 10, a book written 60 years ago. This is Larry Evans. Nothing wrong with MCO 10. I've got a copy of it, green covered as it is. But I only suggest it for holiday reading, not for boning up 20 minutes before you sit down and play Gukesh or somebody weak like that. So he talks about the 3 knights defense. Again, when was the last time you saw a chapter or a section of a chapter in a book dealing with the 3 knights defense? I've got lots and lots of opening books, but I couldn't quickly find anything about it. Well, I have in here, haven't I? Now, here's a move I know is very difficult to handle for Black. And this is something which, an early g6 against 3 knight c3, 3 g6. A move favoured by Steinitz. You'd liked getting into a bit of a pickle on occasion, didn't he? Old Wilhelm Wolf, as he was sometimes known. More about the 3 knights. At one time, Nigel Short and John Nunn, though I'm sure not over the same analytical chessboard. Excuse me. Just a drink. I do apologise. This is when amateurism sets in. It's the middle of the night here and my heating system is broken down. So I borrowed some heaters off people. A bit drying to the throat. This is the 4 knights. There we are. Chapter 7, 4 knights game. When I was a child, I used to play this with both colours. I suppose I learnt a few tricks and traps, didn't I? It is important to note that the position can also arise by transposition from the Petrov defense or the Vienna, which both thwart Black's evasive action. A thorough familiarity with the main lines arising from this basic formation may reward you with many points over the board. Now look, that is good, old-fashioned, sound advice. This is the four knights, and they mention the Belgrade, which is playing d4, and then if e takes d4, knight d5, which was favoured by my friend, the late Ron Harmon. Ron was good with that. I tell you, he was good with that. Belgrade Gambit. Is that what I just said? Yeah, I think it is. Okay. I don't suppose there's any games in here by him, but if there was, they would be worth playing over. There's a game by Gary Kenworthy against Van der Sterren. And Gary won in 14 moves. You'll like the fact I said that. Right. Lots and lots about the four knights. I mean, lots. I have to blow my nose now. Not content with breaking off to have a drink. Now I have to blow my snitch. Oh, I'll be taken off the air. Oh well, I'll be taken off the air. Right, more about the four knights. Obviously, they put the meat and potatoes at the back. That's fair enough. Still more about the four knights. The four knights with 4, bishop b5. A bit like a Lopez, except not quite. And that takes us right to the back of the book. And then there's a list of books published by Chess Digest, which only takes up a couple of pages. And then that's it. There we are. I think that's a very good book to take on holiday with you. It might be light reading, but I think it's good reading. Many sound suggestions. Now, here's a book you may not know, but it has something in common with the Evans and Smith book, because it was published in the US of A. Hacking the King. On the back, there's a very young author who has got 3 Grandmaster norms, but no Grandmaster title, because his Elo rating is far too low. It says David Eggleston is an international master from England and winner of several high-level tournaments. Yes, he certainly is. He teaches chess in schools. Perhaps that's why he hasn't become a grandmaster, because he's so busy teaching that and worrying about his income. There's nothing wrong with that. He perhaps has his family to support. Is it possible to learn how to attack your opponent's king from a book? Guidelines and verbal explanations are fine, argues David Eggleston, the author, of course. But there is no substitute for hard work of carefully analysing the complex position that's on the chessboard in front of you. The author, Britain's newest international master, well, he isn't now, but this is an old book, oldish. It was written 11 years ago. Well, he's still an international master. Slash and burn Sicilians, even mating attacks in the end game. In the process, you will hone your judgment and development, the analytical skills needed to decide if and when to take the plunge. In other words, when to launch your attack. It quotes Emanuel Lasker. Let's see what we get. David Eggleston. It's not always a name known, particularly in the south of England. Quite small. Quite small text, but it's legible, isn't it? You can understand that. You can. There we are. Yeah, it's got games, not necessarily all of them famous. They're games by David. Might be other games by other players, I'm not sure. Yes, there are. Yeah, so I always think it's nice when they mix in game by Daniel King there. It's quite a lot of deep notes. Yes, I would have said this is a book for players, say in ELO terms, about 1800 and above. That's a level I aspire to. But nevertheless, if you do get this, don't get too surprised if some bits, not necessarily above your head, but there's things which perhaps you don't need to dwell on too long. But it's interesting to know them. And who knows, if they start cropping up in your games, then you'll just have to say, oh yes, I saw them in David Eccleston's book. This is published by Mongoose Press. As I say, I don't know if it's still available. The cover price is $15.99, which is clearly worth. The last book I'm going to show you is much older. This was written because the author, Bernard Cafferty, and the publisher, Tony Gillam, A.J. Gillam, realised that there weren't enough best game collections by the Grandmasters, and so therefore they picked out some players who needed more airplay, if you will. The world chess is fortunate in having many very strong players active in the present time. In this book, the authors have selected 10 of these players from outside the ranks of the world champions. They've given what amounts to little more than an introduction to their careers and play of these great players. In choosing examples of play, the authors have steered away from complex heavyweight games to concentrate on snappy finishes and shorter games with an accent on exciting play. And I say to them, thank you. This may just look like a little booklet. There's some pretty good stuff in here. I like this one. It was published by The Chess Player. I think it's still going in Nottingham. And when I tell you when it came out, you'll shrink away and say it can't be true. 1977. And the players covered are Reshevsky, Gligorich, Bronstein, Geller, Larsen, Portisch, Korchnoi, Lebojevic, Hubner, and Mecking. Quite a few of whom, I'm sorry to have to tell you, have passed away. Mecking is still with us, and so is Portisch, but the others are no longer. Gives a breakdown of their lives, starting with Reshevsky, which is rather nice. Like the infant Mozart, he toured Europe, and he did become one of the strongest players in the world. And in 1948, he was selected to play in the tournament to decide Alekhine's successor. And in 1950 or 51, I can't remember which, he beat Botvinnik in the USSR versus USA match. I don't know how many balls it was over, maybe 10. Not in an Olympiad. And he was proclaimed to be, the great challenger, but I'm not sure if he could have played. His openings were never they were okay, they were sound, but they weren't perhaps as sophisticated or sufficiently varied. He was predictable in the first few moves. He liked sitting there and he liked smoking, and he would work very, very hard at the board and get into time pressure as a result of that. Just looking at the chapter on, excuse me, I'm looking at the chapter on Larsen, one on Portisch. This is a long time before the Polgards came on the scene. One on Korchnoi, Interesting. It says USSR Holland against Korchnai's name. Of course, he became officially registered as Swiss. Lebojevic, a player that came and went too soon, in my opinion. There's a game, Lebojevic Delhi, Yugoslavia versus Hungary, 1971. Yes. I'm telling you that because I thought it was a Philidor defence, but now I noticed that it's not. It's a Sicilian. Oh well, still something you would want to look at, isn't it? I'm told Lebojevic gave a simul once over 34 boards, and he was white on every board, as was his right. And he played 1b3 in every single game. Now, if that doesn't make you smile, I don't know what will. Games by Hubner. There's an enormous book that's come out by Robert Hubner. But in fact, it was his suggestion that it should appear at his death. I don't know. But he died recently. And finally, a chapter about Enrique Mecking, who had a short career. He was very successful, but perhaps a little unstable. Here's the book published by The Chess Player. And you probably could get it if you advertised or looked in second-hand websites. Just Googled the title, Chess with the Masters, and had a look round to see if possibly it's being offered. This has been Chess Book Reviews 154. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the books if you see them.